Humanity's golden age had lasted for 1,000 years, 1,000 years of peace so complete that it had become a distant myth in the minds of Earth's inhabitants. The United Terran Concord, a coalition of Earth's nations, and its far-flung colonies, governed the human race with a combination of cutting-edge technology and wisdom forged by centuries of trial and error. War was an idea relegated to textbooks and holographic documentaries, a relic from the past when humanity had struggled to overcome its baser instincts. The Concord's mantra had been clear: the future belongs to those who build, not destroy. A global artificial intelligence, known as Terranet, oversaw the balance of life on Earth. It managed resources, political systems, environmental concerns, and even mediated diplomatic relations with other interstellar species. In many ways, Terranet was humanity's greatest creation, and its influence stretched from Earth's core to the farthest colonies in the Alpha Centauri system. The human race, now more united than ever, was focused on exploration, environmental restoration, and scientific advancement. It was a society built on progress and knowledge, a peaceful utopia that had almost forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. The Concord cities gleamed with high-tech innovation, sprawling megastructures that rose into the sky, powered by renewable energy harnessed from the stars. The average human lived in comfort, freed from the worries of war and poverty, enjoying the fruits of 1,000 years of peace. People traveled freely across the stars, colonizing new planets, studying alien life, and exchanging culture with species far older and more advanced than humanity had ever dreamed of becoming. But even in this era of calm, there were whispers of dissent. A small underground movement, known only as the Ember, had begun to question the price of humanity's tranquility. They believed that the galaxy's apparent peace was nothing more than a fragile illusion, a temporary respite before the inevitable return of conflict. They didn't question humanity's progress or achievements, but they feared that the softening of Earth's military capabilities would leave humanity vulnerable to forces that had no interest in peace. In the shadows, a handful of historians, scientists, and old military veterans studied ancient war doctrines, studying the forgotten conflicts of Earth's violent past. They kept the embers of humanity's martial spirit alive, even as the rest of the galaxy considered them nothing more than relics. To the rest of the universe, humanity was a curiosity, a species that had once been known for their brutal wars, but now seemed content to live in peace and diplomacy. Some aliens dismissed them as weak, even laughable. The Terran Concord, though immensely prosperous, had no standing military worth speaking of. The galaxy had seen human forces as something more akin to a nuisance than a threat, a species that had, perhaps wisely, chosen to forsake conflict in favor of intellectual pursuits and exploration. In a way, it was easier for the galaxy to believe that humans were soft, that they would never again be the warriors they had once been. And yet, beneath the polished surface of human society, something simmered. In the quietest corners of the Concord, old soldiers kept their training sharp, warriors who had fought in forgotten wars long before the current peace. They knew something the galaxy did not. Humans were born to fight. The day the Xeraxi Dominion made contact with humanity was the day the galaxy's peace fractured. It began with a simple message, one that seemed almost too ridiculous to take seriously. Surrender your worlds, or face extinction. The cold, calculated transmission, sent in the ancient Xeraxi tongue, was broadcast across every channel. It came through without warning, without any negotiation, only a stark ultimatum. For the first time in 1,000 years, humanity was faced with a challenge that couldn't be solved through diplomacy or peaceful dialogue. The Xeraxi Dominion was a vast empire stretching across hundreds of star systems, its reach long enough to make most of the galaxy's most powerful races tremble. They were a race of highly intelligent, militaristic beings, known for their ruthless efficiency in combat and their belief in their own superiority. To the Xeraxi, humanity was a relic of the past, a species that had once known violence, but had long since abandoned it in favor of peace. Their message was clear: "We will conquer you. It is only a matter of time." The response from the Terran Concord was not immediate, nor was it one of panic. Earth's leadership convened, first with silence, then with measured deliberation. Terranet, the AI that governed human society, suggested an open dialogue, a chance to understand the nature of this new threat. But the military planners within the Concord's High Council knew that the situation was far more serious than they had anticipated. Despite the Concord's reputation as a peaceful force, the remnants of humanity's old military knowledge had not been entirely forgotten. But the question now was it enough? The Ember, the underground group that had long warned of the galaxy's shifting balance, now moved into the light. They were the first to speak out in favor of action. Members of the Ember included scholars who had studied ancient human conflicts, AI strategists, and most critically, old veterans who had once fought in humanity's past wars. They were a small faction, but they knew the truth. The galaxy would not view humans as a threat until they were reminded of what humanity was truly capable of. The Xeraxi would never see them coming. Behind closed doors, the Concord began to prepare. The old war protocols were dusted off, deep within the vaults of Mars, where relics of human warfare from long ago had been stored. Exoskeletons and military-grade AI systems, all once seen as outdated, were brought back into production. But it wasn't just the hardware that was resurrected. Humans didn't just fight with technology. They fought with cunning. And while the Concord's military might have been dormant for a millennium, the Ember knew that the true strength of humanity was not in its weapons, but in its ability to adapt, to outthink and outmaneuver even the most superior enemies. Still, there was no full mobilization. Earth had not yet gone to war. The Xeraxi had underestimated humanity's caution, believing their message would spark only fear. They could not have known how deeply humanity had embedded its peace, nor could they have predicted how swift and decisive the response would be once the war machine was reawakened. But it was about to be awakened, and the Xeraxi would soon learn that under humanity's calm exterior, there still burned a fire that would turn their own words against them. The initial Xeraxi transmission was just the beginning. The warlike empire, confident in their superior technology and ruthlessness, began a slow but deliberate march toward the outer human colonies. Their arrogance was palpable. The Xeraxi did not expect much resistance. They believed that humanity's long era of peace had rendered them weak and complacent. In their minds, it was only a matter of time before the soft humans would surrender or submit to their demands. The Terran Concord's response, however, was far from a simple negotiation or passive acceptance. The first sign that humanity would not bend came in the form of a public announcement, one that seemed strangely calm amidst the tension. The Concord's president, Alina Harrow, addressed the galaxy with poise, her words carefully crafted for both the Xeraxi and the citizens of Earth. To the Xeraxi Dominion, you underestimate us. Your demand is heard, and we will respond. We may have enjoyed a long era of peace, but peace is not weakness. We are not a species that simply rolls over. The time for silence is over. Humanity will not submit. We will fight, and we will remember who we are. Her words were not just a declaration of defiance. They were a signal to every human, from the colonies to Earth itself, that they had not forgotten their heritage. The Ember, once a scattered underground group, now found themselves thrust into the light. They were the ones who had always kept the knowledge of humanity's military history alive, buried deep within old libraries, forgotten archives, and within the minds of soldiers who had fought in wars long past. The Ember's members were a mix of aged veterans, brilliant tacticians, and rebellious thinkers who believed humanity's greatest strength was its ability to adapt and learn from the past. It was they who began organizing the military response, working with the Concord's highest councils and military leaders. The Xeraxi, with their towering ships and superior firepower, would soon discover that humanity was not to be underestimated, not because of superior numbers, but because of the indomitable human spirit. Behind the scenes, new technologies and weapons were rapidly developed, using resources once reserved for peaceful endeavors. AI systems were reprogrammed, and humanity's advanced robotics, initially designed for construction and exploration, were repurposed for combat. The Concord's most capable minds tapped into ancient human war strategies, resurrecting long-dead combat techniques and modifying them with futuristic innovations. The first real test came when the Xeraxi fleet arrived at the outer colony of Aldebaran. The Dominion sent a fleet of warships, brimming with soldiers, prepared to overwhelm the humans. But when the Xeraxi arrived, they were met not with surrender, but with an unexpected and brilliant trap. Humanity, despite their technological inferiority in comparison, had crafted a perfect ambush. Xeraxi ships, which relied heavily on predictive AI and automated strategies, were outwitted by a surprising counterattack. It wasn't just firepower that turned the tide, but human cunning, as tactics long forgotten were executed with precision. It wasn't the destruction that shocked the Xeraxi. It was the unmistakable laughter that rang out from the human forces during the battle. There were no cries of anguish, no terror in their voices. The humans were laughing, mocking their enemies in a way that no one expected, and Xeraxi could not comprehend it. It was a moment of pure defiance, a declaration that humanity's war would not be just about survival, but about reclaiming something far more dangerous: the audacity to laugh in the face of overwhelming odds. The Xeraxi general overseeing the operation, Varneth Relak, witnessed his fleet being systematically dismantled, his carefully calculated strategies crumbling. He was baffled by what he saw. Humans should have been afraid. Instead, they reveled in the chaos, relishing their victory with a sense of freedom that made no sense to him. He broadcasted a message across the battlefield. "What are you? We thought you were extinct. You fight as if your lives are nothing, but you still laugh. Why?" The humans responded, their voices united over the comms. "Because we remember what it feels like to fight, and we remember what it's like to win." The Xeraxi had made their first mistake by underestimating humanity. The sheer audacity with which the humans fought caught the Dominion off guard. But now, the full scope of humanity's counteroffensive was about to unfold. The Terran Concord, having carefully restructured its forces, launched a bold strike in the outer system, an audacious and unexpected maneuver that would send shockwaves through the galaxy. The first major conflict occurred at the human colony of Ganymede, a moon of Jupiter that had been long ignored by the larger powers of the galaxy due to its seemingly insignificant value. But to the Xeraxi, Ganymede was a perfect target, a lightly defended world on the fringe, perfect for making a statement. The Dominion's fleet descended in droves, hundreds of warships in their wake, their weapons aimed to obliterate anything in their path. But the human defenders, many of whom had been trained in ancient combat strategies, were ready. They knew Ganymede's landscape like the back of their hands. Hidden beneath its icy surface were secret bases, where humanity had stockpiled advanced weapons that had never been used, weapons of war that had lain dormant for 1,000 years. The Xeraxi fleet arrived in the system expecting an easy victory. They didn't expect Ganymede's defense to be led by an unlikely team. Old war heroes who had spent decades in cryosleep, strategically brought back to life by the Concord's reactivation of ancient battle protocols. They were led by General Alana Riker, a veteran of the Terran-Euros conflict, who had fought long before peace was declared. She stood now in the heart of a military command center, surrounded by holograms of battle plans and tactical readouts, her face set with quiet determination. As the Xeraxi ships moved to bombard the colony, they were hit by an unexpected counteroffensive. A swarm of drones, camouflaged in Ganymede's atmosphere, launched from hidden hangars. They struck first, using advanced tactics drawn from Earth's history. Ambushes inspired by guerrilla warfare, precision bombing runs that disrupted the enemy's formation. The Xeraxi fleet tried to retaliate, but their reliance on predictable battle algorithms became their downfall. Humanity's unpredictability, their ability to adapt and outthink their enemies, had become their greatest weapon. Then came the crowning blow. An ancient weapon, long thought lost. The orbital railguns, massive electromagnetic cannons positioned in orbit around Ganymede, came online. These weapons had been developed during humanity's earliest space exploration days, forgotten when peace had reigned. The first shot fired shook the Xeraxi fleet to its core. A single railgun round, traveling at nearly the speed of light, pierced the hull of the lead Xeraxi ship, causing a chain reaction that tore through its entire fleet. In a span of minutes, the Xeraxi were in retreat. As the last of their ships limped out of the system, General Riker stood on the deck of her command station, eyes narrowed at the wreckage scattered across Ganymede's orbit. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried throughout the command center. "They thought they could take us because they didn't understand us," she said. "We're not just survivors, we're fighters, and we'll make them remember that." The Xeraxi had lost a battle, but more than that, they had lost their perception of humanity. The humans, once seen as weak, had proven that they could strike as hard as any warrior in the galaxy. Now, the Dominion would have to face a humanity that had reawakened, a humanity that fought not out of desperation but out of pride, knowing that the fire of their ancestors burned still. The war had shifted in humanity's favor, and with it came a surprising change in the tone of the conflict. As the Xeraxi retreated from Ganymede, licking their wounds and scrambling to reestablish their strategic dominance, humanity began to realize something that no one had anticipated. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were enjoying it. The human soldiers, many of whom had been raised in a society where war was nothing more than a distant historical concept, had suddenly found themselves thrust into the chaos of battle. And they were thriving. It wasn't just the military veterans who had returned to the fold, but a new generation of humans, eager to prove that the peace they had enjoyed for so long had not made them weak. At the front lines, soldiers weren't just surviving the brutal onslaughts of the Xeraxi. They were laughing. Whether it was the sight of a perfectly executed ambush, a joke in the middle of a firefight, or a sarcastic remark as a Xeraxi ship exploded into space dust, the human forces found joy in the madness. It was a defiance of the very notion that war could break them. The more brutal the Xeraxi grew, the louder the laughter of humanity became. On the newly formed communications channels, videos from the battlefield began to emerge. One video, taken from a human fighter's helmet cam, showed a squadron of soldiers standing before a ruined Xeraxi warship. The camera zoomed in on a soldier holding a severed Xeraxi flag, his face covered in grime, grinning wildly. "Guess they don't like our sense of humor," he said into the comms, holding the flag up for the camera. "Look at this. They sent a whole fleet, and this is all they got. If this is what victory looks like, I'll take it." The clip went viral. A few days later, another video surfaced. This one, from a battle on the planet Regulus, showed a squad of human soldiers repelling an attack with surprisingly old-fashioned tactics: hand-to-hand combat. As they fended off waves of Xeraxi troops, their laughter echoed across the comm channels, mixing with their taunts. "You call that a strategy? I've seen better planning in a game of Tetris," one soldier shouted as he slammed an enemy to the ground, throwing a few exaggerated punches for effect. The Xeraxi, who were used to cold, clinical warfare, could not understand it. What were these humans? How could they face annihilation and laugh? How could they continue to fight with such confidence, even when the odds were against them? The situation reached a fever pitch when a human vessel, the Incorruptible, led a daring raid on a Xeraxi supply convoy in the heart of their home system. In a bold, borderline reckless maneuver, the crew of the Incorruptible disabled the convoy's lead ship with an unexpected strike from an ancient weapon, a magnetic pulse cannon once used for mining operations on Mars. The Xeraxi were unprepared for the sheer audacity of the move, as humanity's forces broadcast their victory to the entire fleet. "Eat dirt, you overgrown lizards," shouted the captain, Captain Jonas Sky, with a grin so wide it almost split his face. "We're just getting started." The message was clear. The war had become something the Xeraxi hadn't accounted for. Not only were humans effective in battle, but they were fearless and remarkably unfazed by the horrors of war. More importantly, they had a sense of humor that made them unpredictable. The galaxy's most feared conquerors had never faced an enemy that laughed in the face of destruction, one that mocked their tactics and turned the act of warfare into a game, one where every victory felt like a triumph of spirit. On the galactic communication networks, memes of the war started to spread. Soldiers posed with captured Xeraxi helmets. Ridiculous victory celebrations erupted across Earth and the colonies. The humans weren't just winning. They were celebrating. And the Xeraxi, with their discipline and cold logic, had no idea how to respond to an enemy that refused to be intimidated. The Xeraxi Dominion had underestimated humanity's resilience, but now they faced a greater challenge. The human spirit was not only unbroken, it had evolved into something far more dangerous than they could have predicted. As the war raged on, the Dominion's cold, calculated strategies began to falter, not because they were ineffective, but because the humans had become an unpredictable force, their laughter and audacity unsettling their every move. At the heart of this transformation was the growing legend of Captain Jonah Sky and his flagship, the Incorruptible. After the daring raid on the Xeraxi convoy, Captain Sky's name had spread throughout the galaxy, and his crew had become the poster children of humanity's resurgence. Sky had been an ordinary officer in the Terran Concord, but now, in the midst of a war that defied all expectations, he had become a symbol of human ingenuity and bravado. Sky's tactics were simple but brilliant. He relied on deception, misdirection, and unpredictability. Tactics long forgotten by a galaxy that had become complacent with its routine warfare. The Xeraxi, who relied heavily on their advanced AI-driven strategies, couldn't cope with the erratic moves of the humans. Sky's crew used every trick in the book, from feigned retreats to fake transmissions, to lure the Xeraxi into traps. And they laughed all the while. In one particularly audacious move, Sky had led a small fleet of human warships into the heart of the Xeraxi's most fortified system, a stronghold called Talon's Reach. The Xeraxi had expected a quick and decisive battle, but what they didn't expect was that humanity would fight with such abandon. The human ships, outfitted with experimental technology and retrofitted with ancient weaponry, moved in patterns that defied logic, engaging in chaotic, close-quarters combat that left the Xeraxi scrambling. "We don't do this the Xeraxi way," Sky had said over the comms during the battle. "We fight human." The battle was a resounding victory for humanity, but it came with its own consequences. Sky's flagship had sustained significant damage, and the victory had come at a cost. However, what was even more significant was the psychological toll it took on the Xeraxi. The Dominion had always prided itself on its superiority in battle. They were a race built on cold, efficient strategy, but humanity, with its unpredictability, had begun to turn the tide. With each victory, the Xeraxi became more erratic. They began to distrust their own systems, questioning their AI protocols. The once infallible military tactics that had served them for centuries now seemed ineffective in the face of humanity's chaotic brilliance. The Dominion's leadership grew frustrated. General Varnath Rilak, who had led the initial assault on Ganymede, had become obsessed with the human response. He watched in disbelief as their laughter and audacity turned the tide of battle. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Rilak ordered a full-scale invasion of Earth. His hope was simple. If he could crush the heart of humanity, he could break their will to fight. But what he didn't know was that the Terran Concord had been preparing for this moment ever since the first Xeraxi ship had entered their space. Earth, once the peaceful heart of the Concord, was now a fortress. The battle to defend Earth was coming, and it would be humanity's greatest test. Sky and his crew stood ready, knowing that the Xeraxi would not relent. But they also knew something the Dominion didn't. Humanity wasn't afraid to fight. Humanity wasn't afraid to lose. Most importantly, humanity wasn't afraid to laugh while they did it. The Xeraxi had made their move. General Varnath Relak, who had spent months watching humanity's victories from the sidelines, finally set his sights on the most sacred of all human worlds, Earth. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Dominion would not only challenge humanity's colonies but would strike at the heart of their civilization. If they could break Earth, they believed, they could break humanity. Relak's fleet was massive, a constellation of warships descending toward Earth like an unyielding storm. Hundreds of ships, each bristling with weapons and war machines, each with the singular goal of obliterating the world that had defied them for so long. This was the final move. This was the reckoning. Humanity, however, was ready. The Incorruptible, the flagship of Captain Jonah Sky, sat at the forefront of the defensive efforts, surrounded by a coalition of human ships, including retired war veterans who had come back to fight once more. The time for clever tactics and guerrilla strikes was over. Now, the battle for Earth would be one of all-out war. And if there was one thing humanity had learned in this conflict, it was that they could always find a way to win, or at least make the enemy question their own certainty. On Earth's surface, preparations were equally intense. Cities that had once been gleaming monuments of peace were now fortified to withstand a full-scale assault. Earth's military might, long dormant, had been reawakened, with hidden underground bunkers and defense systems that had once been used for other, less public purposes. The planet's atmosphere was laced with defense drones, and its surface covered in automated weapons platforms. Human ingenuity had turned Earth into an unbreachable fortress. As the Xeraxi fleet approached, Relak issued a final command: initiate the planetary bombardment. The Xeraxi prepared to strike Earth's cities, hoping to crush the human spirit once and for all. But what they didn't know was that they had already underestimated Earth's defenses. The first wave of Xeraxi missiles were intercepted almost immediately. As they entered the atmosphere, they were met by a network of energy shields designed to deflect them with pinpoint precision. The Dominion ships retaliated, sending waves of ground troops to assault Earth's defenses, but the automated weaponry was relentless. Human soldiers, armed with ancient rifles and modern tech, fought side by side, ready to push the invaders back at all costs. It wasn't just the weapons or the advanced technology that gave humanity the edge. It was the unshakable belief that Earth would not fall. That belief was amplified by every soldier, every civilian, and every fighter on the ground and in space. The laughter of humanity didn't fade in the face of destruction. It grew louder, a battle cry against invaders who had never understood the human capacity for defiance. In the heart of the battle, Captain Sky's voice crackled over the comms, his words cutting through the chaos like a blade. "This is Earth's fight," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "We don't lose here. Not now, not ever." Sky's fleet launched their counterattack, moving with lightning speed. His strategy was unorthodox, but it worked. Using decoys and subversive tactics, Sky and his crew tricked the Xeraxi into thinking their strongest defenses were elsewhere, luring their fleet into a trap. In the heart of the Xeraxi formation, a human strike force tore through the heart of their command ship. As Relak watched his fleet crumble from the flagship's bridge, he knew that Earth had won. The war had been long and bloody, but the humans had shown one thing above all else: no force, no matter how strong, could ever break them. And through it all, the laughter continued, loud, victorious, and unrelenting. The Xeraxi fleet was in retreat. General Varnath Relak watched, his heart sinking, as the remnants of his once mighty armada scattered like shattered glass in the wake of the human onslaught. The battle for Earth, the final gambit of the Xeraxi Dominion, had ended in defeat. But it wasn't just their defeat that stung. It was the utter humiliation of it all. The humans had turned the tide with audacity, wit, and an unwavering resolve. What was supposed to be a conquest to crush a species that had enjoyed a millennium of peace had instead become a nightmare for the Dominion. The war was no longer about military might. It had become about humanity's refusal to yield, their unwillingness to bend in the face of annihilation. Captain Joma Sky stood at the command deck of the Incorruptible, his face still grinning despite the toll of the battle. Earth was safe. The Xeraxi, once certain they would crush the humans under their heel, were now limping away, their spirits broken. Sky took a deep breath, the weight of victory pressing down on him, but he couldn't suppress the feeling of satisfaction. It wasn't just the tactical brilliance of the humans that had won the day. It was their very nature. Their adaptability. Their refusal to be cowed. The final blow had come not from superior weapons or overwhelming force, but from an unexpected source. An old Earth tradition. The victory speech. As the Xeraxi retreat began in earnest, a live broadcast, orchestrated by the Concord's communications team, was sent out to every corner of the galaxy. It was a message from President Elena Harrow, broadcast on every frequency, over every channel. She stood in front of the ruins of a Xeraxi warship, the debris of the once mighty fleet scattered around her. To the Xeraxi Dominion, she began, her voice calm but unwavering. We are not the peaceful, defenseless species you believed us to be. We are not the pushovers you thought you could crush under your boot. We are humanity. And we remember the fires of war, the price of peace, and the power of our will. Her words were accompanied by footage of human soldiers, not in triumph, but simply standing together, unbroken. The image was powerful. The humans were not just defending Earth. They were reclaiming something deeper, their identity, their pride, and their defiance. President Harrow's voice carried across the stars. We may have had 1,000 years of calm, but that calm was not weakness. It was the time we needed to remember what makes us strong. We stand not only as survivors, but as the inheritors of 1,000 years of grit, courage, and a history of fighting back. And no one, no matter how mighty, can erase that. But it was the final line that echoed through the galaxy, the one that would forever define the legacy of humanity's victory. She raised a fist to the sky, her eyes fierce and unyielding. So, Xeraxi, if you're still out there, remember this. We don't just fight. We fight with laughter. The broadcast cut to a human fighter, helmet on, smiling as if Xeraxi's ship exploded in the distance. The unmistakable sound of laughter rippled through the comm channels, a perfect, chaotic punctuation to their victory. The humans had won not just a war, but a victory for all who had ever faced oppression and laughed in defiance. And with that, the war was over. The Xeraxi had learned the hard way that they had misjudged humanity's power. But it wasn't in their weapons, their strength, or their numbers. It was in their laughter, in their spirit, and in their ability to fight against the darkness with joy in their hearts. Humanity had won, and they would never forget how it felt.